I don't think anyone ever expects their life to change in an instant. But for me, it for sure did. I made a mistake, and for a few moments, I died because of it. The doctors brought me back to life, but in those seconds, I saw what lies ahead of all of us, and it is incredibly beautiful. It was an early Thursday morning, just like any other. The alarm clock buzzed at 6 a.m., dragging me out of the deep, dreamless sleep I had fallen into after staying up way too late the night before. The house was still dark, and I did not want to wake up. I ended up pressing the snooze button, hoping for just a few more precious minutes of rest. I'd been feeling exhausted for months, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I had a family to take care of, bills to pay, and a job that demanded more of me than I had to give most days. But I kept going. What else could I do? I grabbed my keys and my bag, kissed my kids on the forehead as they slept, and hurried out the door. I remember that I was stressed. The day ahead was supposed to be full of meetings and reports, and I was feeling a bit worried. I was driving automatically. My mind was buried under the stress and the demands of the day ahead. I didn't feel connected to anything, not to myself, not to the world around me. It was like I was on autopilot, going through the motions. As I approached the first intersection, the light turned yellow. Normally I would have slowed down, but I was in a hurry, and I needed to get to the office as fast as I could. I pressed my foot harder on the gas, hoping to make it through before the light changed. I remember that the next light was also turning yellow. That annoyed the hell out of me, so I pressed the gas even more. It was a mistake. I was too focused on my own rush, too distracted by the pressure of everything I had to do, to notice the car speeding toward me from the opposite direction. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I don't know how to explain what happens in the split second before a car crash. It's like time slows down, and every detail becomes excruciatingly clear. I remember it clearly. One moment I was rushing through my thoughts, worrying about being late, and the next moment, everything stopped. I remember the sharp squeal of tires from somewhere to my left, this loud blare of a car horn, and the unmistakable flash of panic as I turned my head toward the sound. It was a direct hit. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. The force of the collision slammed into me from the side, the sound of metal twisting and shattering glass in my ears. So my car spun violently, my body jerking against the seatbelt as the world around me became a blur of motion. It all happened so fast, but in that moment, it felt like I could see everything in vivid detail. My dashboard was mush, the windshield cracking into a spiderweb of fractures, the papers and coffee cup in my car flying through the air. The worst part? I did not faint immediately. The pain hit me next. A sharp, white-hot sensation shot through my side, and my head slammed against the window as the car twisted and finally came to a stop. I was thrown against the seatbelt so hard that it felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, dazed and confused, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But my mind was slow to catch up with reality, and all I could think was, this can't be happening. This isn't real. But it was real. The pain in my ribs and the dull ache in my head told me that much. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My arms felt heavy, and my vision blurred in and out of focus as I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my head. Someone shouted for help, but it all felt far away, like I was watching it happen from somewhere else. I wasn't fully present anymore. My body was still in the car, still broken and battered, but I wasn't really there. I was losing my consciousness. That's when it happened. It's hard to describe exactly what happened next. But in that moment, I felt myself being pulled away from the pain, from the fear, from everything that was happening in the physical world. One second I was sitting in that car, barely holding on, and the next I was floating. Yes, floating. Above the scene, watching everything unfold from a distance. I could see myself slumped over in the driver's seat, my body limp, my face pale. But I didn't feel connected to it anymore. It was like looking at a stranger, at someone else entirely. I was outside of myself, detached from the chaos below. And as strange as it sounds, I wasn't afraid. In fact, I felt more peaceful than I ever had in my life. The pain was gone, the panic and fear were gone, and in their place was a calmness that I can't quite put into words. From my vantage point, I could see everything clearly. I could see the paramedics arriving, rushing toward the wreckage with equipment in hand. I could see the bystanders gathering, some with their hands over their mouths in shock, others on their phones, trying to call for help. I could even hear snippets of their conversations, though they felt distant, like echoes in a far-off tunnel. But none of it felt important to me anymore. I wasn't concerned about the accident, about the damage, or even about my own body. All I felt was peace. It wasn't just a lack of fear or pain. It was something deeper. It was as though all the weight I had been carrying, the stress, the worry, the constant sense of not having enough time, had been lifted off my shoulders. I felt light, free in a way I hadn't known was possible. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint at first, just a soft glow in the distance, but it grew brighter with each passing second. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, almost comforting, like the first rays of the sun you see when you're on a holiday. I felt drawn to it, like it was calling me, beckoning me to come closer. Without even thinking, I started moving toward the light. I wasn't walking, and I wasn't flying. It was more like I was gliding effortlessly, as though there were no obstacles between me and that warm, inviting glow. The world below faded further and further away, the sounds of the sirens and the voices of the people growing quieter until they disappeared entirely. All that was left was the light, and the overwhelming sense of peace that came with it. There was no fear, no pain, no urgency. Just a sense of calm and a deep knowing that wherever I was headed, it was where I was supposed to be. I didn't know how long I floated there, moving closer and closer to the light. Time felt different, as if it didn't exist the way it had in the world I had just left. Seconds, minutes, hours, it all blurred together in this place where everything seemed to happen at once, and yet not at all. I felt a love unlike anything I had ever felt in my life. Deeper than any human connection, purer than any affection I had ever known. It was unconditional, a love that enveloped every part of me without judgment or expectation. It filled me up completely, washing over me like a warm tide, erasing every bit of anxiety and fear I had ever felt. As I moved into the light, I became aware that there seemed to be some figures in there. They weren't people, not in the way we understand people, but they were beings. Beings of pure light radiating warmth and peace. It didn't look like the angels you see in paintings or movies. No wings or halos, but their presence was unmistakable. They were tall, radiant, and surrounded by an energy that made me feel safe, comforted, and completely loved. I didn't need to ask who they were. I knew instantly, in the way that you just know something deep inside you, that these were angels. There was a kind of silent communication that happened between us, something that transcended language or sound. It was as if they were speaking directly into my soul, and I could understand them perfectly. In their presence, I felt a deep sense of belonging, like I had finally come home after a long journey. As I stood or floated, I wasn't really sure. In the presence of the angels, I began to understand something even deeper. I was not just a body. I was not just a mind. I was a soul that had existed long before I was born, and that would continue to exist long after my physical body was gone. The life I had lived up until that point, with all its struggles and joys, was just a part of a much larger journey. A journey that didn't end with death but continued on, endlessly. It was a strange realization, but it felt right. It felt like I had known it all along, deep down, but had forgotten somewhere along the way. I was more than just my job, more than just a collection of achievements and failures. As I stood there, surrounded by the light and the angels, I felt a new presence approaching. It was different from the angels, more powerful, more intense. Yet it was still filled with the same love and warmth. I didn't need anyone to tell me who it was. I knew. It was God. It's hard to describe what it felt like in that moment. I had always imagined that if I ever encountered God, I would feel small, insignificant even, like I was standing in the presence of something so vast and unknowable that I would be overwhelmed by it. But that wasn't what I felt at all. Instead, I felt the deepest sense of belonging, like I was standing in front of someone who had known me all my life, someone who loved me completely, without judgment or hesitation. You ever had that feeling of seeing your mother or father after being gone for a long time? It felt like that, but to another whole level. There were no words exchanged, not in the way we normally communicate, but there was no need for words. In that moment, I realized that this was what I had been searching for my entire life. I had been chasing after success, approval, love from others, and a sense of purpose, all the while feeling like something was missing. But here, in the presence of God, I knew that what I had been looking for was this love, this connection to something greater than myself. As I stood in the light, feeling this overwhelming love, I began to see my life in a way I never had before. It wasn't like a movie playing in front of me, or a series of images flashing before my eyes. It was more like I was experiencing the essence of my life, the moments that truly mattered, the moments where love had played a part, whether I had given love or received it, as those moments seemed to shine brighter than anything else. I saw times when I had shown kindness to a stranger, moments when I had been there for a friend in need, times when I had given love freely to my family, without expecting anything in return. And in those moments, I realized I had been most connected to this love, the love that now surrounded me, the love of God. We are love. At our very core, we are made of the same love that I was feeling in that moment. It's what connects us to each other, to the world around us, and to God. But as I stood there, lost in the beauty of the moment, I began to sense something else. A gentle tug, a pull that seemed to be calling me back to the world I had left behind. First, I resisted. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go back to the pain, the stress, the worry of everyday life. Here in this place, everything was perfect. Everything was as it should be. Why would I want to return? But the pull grew stronger, and with it came a quiet understanding. My time in this place wasn't over, but I wasn't meant to stay. There was still more for me to do, more love for me to give, more lessons for me to learn. My journey wasn't finished yet. The angels surrounded me once more, their presence gentle and reassuring. They were telling me, in that same silent way, that it was time for me to go back. I wasn't being sent back as a punishment or because I had done something wrong. I was being sent back because I still had a purpose to fulfill. The light began to fade, the presence of God growing softer, but never fully leaving. And slowly, gently, I felt myself being pulled back into the world I had left behind, back into my body, back into life. The return was gentle, but unmistakable. It began as a slow awareness creeping back into my body, first a dull ache, then sharper sensations, and finally the rhythmic beeping of machines. At first, I wasn't entirely sure where I was. I felt the weight of my body again, the tightness in my chest, and the pounding in my head. The peace and light I had experienced only moments before began to fade as the reality of the world I had left behind came rushing back. I kept my eyes closed, not quite ready to rejoin the world. I could hear the faint murmur of voices, the rustling of movement around me, and the pain. I began to feel it again. An immense amount of pain. Slowly, I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh overhead lights of the hospital room. I realized I was no longer at the crash. I was in a pale hospital room. It took me a moment to fully adjust, to make sense of the tubes and wires attached to my body, the machines keeping track of my vital signs. I was alive. I had survived. I turned my head slightly and saw my family sitting nearby. My children, my spouse, and my closest friends. They had these worried, but a wave of relief appeared once they noticed I was awake. The doctors came in shortly after, checking my vitals, asking me questions. I nodded and responded as best I could. But my mind was elsewhere. I was still in that place of light and peace, still feeling the presence of God and the love I had experienced. It was hard to focus on the details of my injuries, the medications, or the prognosis for recovery. All of it felt so insignificant compared to what I had just seen, what I had just learned. In the days that followed, I began to process everything that had happened. The accident had been severe, much worse than I initially realized. The doctors told me that I was incredibly lucky to be alive. The impact had left me with broken ribs, a concussion, and internal injuries that required surgery. There had been moments, they said, when they weren't sure if I would make it. But I knew in my heart that my survival wasn't just luck. I had been given a second chance, and that knowledge changed everything. As I lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by the people I loved, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for my life, for the opportunity to be with my family again, for the chance to live differently. In the quiet moments of recovery, I reflected on what I had learned. The message was simple, yet so profound. Life is about love. It's about giving love, receiving love, and living in a way that reflects the unconditional love I had experienced in that place of light. I realized that I had spent so much of my life focused on things that didn't matter, chasing success, worrying about what other people thought of me, striving to meet impossible standards I had set for myself. But none of that had mattered in the presence of God. All that had mattered was love. I thought about the moments of my life that had shone brightly during my time in the light, the times when I had chosen kindness, compassion, and love. Those were the moments that had truly mattered, not the accomplishments, not the accolades, not the material successes. Returning to everyday life wasn't easy. There were physical challenges to overcome, of course. The recovery process was long and painful, and there were days when the frustration of being dependent on others tested my patience. Even in those difficult moments, I held on to the peace I had felt in the presence of God. I reminded myself that this was all temporary, that the pain and frustration were just part of the journey, and that beyond it all was the love that had never left me. Emotionally and spiritually, the return to normal life was more challenging than I had expected. The rush of daily life, the constant distractions, and the pressures of work and family life all felt overwhelming at first. But I made a conscious decision to live differently, to approach life with a new perspective. I took time to slow down, to be present with my family, to to appreciate the simple moments that I had often overlooked in the past. But one of the most profound changes was how I viewed the people around me. I began to see the people in my life differently, not just as individuals with their own struggles and challenges, but as souls on their own journeys, each one connected to me in a way that went beyond the physical. As I continued to recover, I began to look for ways to live out the lessons I had learned. It became more intentional about how I spent my time, focusing less on the things that didn't matter and more on building relationships, offering kindness, and being present in the moment. I made an effort to connect more deeply with my children, to listen to them, to be fully there for them in a way I hadn't been before. I found joy in the small things, the laughter of my kids, the warmth of the sun on my face, the quiet moments of reflection. I also realized that I needed to share what I had experienced. It wasn't something I could keep to myself. The love I had felt in that place, the peace that had filled me, was something I wanted others to know. I didn't know how to explain it in a way that would make sense to everyone, but I knew that the message was clear. Love is everything. It's the one thing that transcends life and death, the one thing that lasts forever. I began to talk about it with my friends and family, not in a preachy way, but as a simple truth I had come to understand. Some people listened, others didn't, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I was living the truth I had learned. In the years since the accident, life has continued, as it always does. There have been new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. But through it all, I've held on to the knowledge that there is something beyond this life, something greater than anything we can imagine, and that something is love, pure, unconditional, and eternal. It's the reason we're here, the reason we exist, and it's what we take with us when we leave this world. I don't fear death anymore. I know that when my time comes, I'll return to that place of light, to the presence of God, to the love that has always been with me. And until that day comes, I'll do my best to live my life in a way that reflects that love. To love more deeply, to give more freely, and to be the person I was always meant to be. Life is a gift, and so is love. And in the end, love is all that matters.